Okay, here we are. Early Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome. We are so happy you are joining us. We want to give everybody a moment to sign in and come together. I put the word out there about who our special guest is, Brad Sham, and we're just delighted to have him, and of course, Barry and me. And we're very excited to be with you all and begin this transition that happens every afternoon about this time prior to the sun setting. And the reason I think that we kind of started this was to ease into Shabbat as opposed to, coming to temple and sitting down and the mind is everywhere. This kind of worked, and it was a way during pandemic to really bring ourselves together as a community. I know we would see you, Brad, there at services
Sure.
every single week.
I'm still there every single week. I'm just not there.
That's right.
Yeah. But, Debbie, I think it's such a great idea. Rabbi Herzog Cohen has asked at the beginning of services on Friday night several times, especially over the last month or so, about, and she's invited people who are watching on Facebook to put it in the chat, what do you do to separate your space, create your space for Shabbat, for these services, to make it different? And the first time she asked, I felt real guilty because I don't do anything. My computer is at my desk, and I sit at my desk, and but I know it's Shabbos. This, to me, is a fantastic way of bringing mindfulness to the fact that it's really, for the same reason we're going to go through Elul before the high holidays, it's really not the most effective way to fully appreciate Shabbat, I don't think, by going helter-skelter until 6:10 and then try to shut everything down and jump in. And I know that I find myself on Friday afternoons, by right about this time, I'm kind of clearing the decks. I'm not going to commit to a work project late on Friday afternoon because I'm getting ready, even though I'm not going to do anything but sit at the computer. So this, to me, is brilliant. I hope it's something that carries forward after we're all back physically together.
Well, thank you. We're both really honored and happy that you chose to give away part of your important Friday afternoon.
No, this is what better way to get ready for Shabbat.
Well, when people found out you were coming, they were saying things to me and Barry, like, which things will you ask Brad Sham? And before we get going, I do want to tell you all, we're standing very 6 feet apart. So if you happen to look at us, please know
I brought a mask.
We're very respectful of one another's health and wellness. Okay. But anyway, so people wanted, they want to talk about the Cowboys. They want to talk about your longevity with the Cowboys and in sports and all of that stuff. And they were like, well, Debbie, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to ask Brad Sham? But before I ask you anything, I want to tell you one of the most meaningful conversations that you and I have ever had.
Please.
And I know there'd be so many reasons why other people would vie for your attention, but mine might be a little different. So when I went to...
You understand, any time a conversation starts like this, I get a little nervous. Do you remember the time? Oh, my God.
So when I chanted Torah for the very first time, and I'm not even going to say in my adult life because it was in my whole life.
I remember you were
there.
brilliant. You were brilliant.
And you were about 3 rows or 4 rows to the end in the back. And I kept seeing you there. And your presence gives me definitely some comfort. And I know that you're there not for any other reason other than you want to be there and you appreciate the sacred text and the music and everything about those moments. And so when I started walking down when it was over and we were going to go do the Kiddush and we were going to go bless the challah and all of that, I looked at you and said, I knew I got 3 words wrong. And you said, no, you didn't. And this isn't about me at all. It's just the fact is, to have someone in your congregation who's following with their heart, who cares about the other congregants, who's pushing them along in their adult education, that's really what we meant today to be about. And that's what all this stuff is on the table, which would be so familiar to you, but...
what is all this stuff?
What's this word?
Kavanah.
Kavanah, an intention, a purpose, and after my kids were older and I wasn't running around and chasing them, and I had a little bit more time than I had kind of in my previous life of mothering people and running around, although I did other Jewish things, lots of Jewish things, I wanted a chance to learn how to read Hebrew myself, not just work on a transliteration. And let me tell you, was I good with transliteration when you met me?
No. But you learn how to become really good at transliteration.
Well, I remember Barry thought I spoke Hebrew initially. And I had just memorized stuff from my kids' bar and bat mitzvahs, but I decided no. And so the place I started was right here with the Aleph Bet flashcards, and I moved on to kid books, Time to Read Hebrew, and all of these other things that you see here.
This one's on my shelf. Alan Lew, Be Still and Get Going.
It's a wonderful one.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we kind of thought that, so that's a gift for you today.
Oh,
now you have two of them.
Oh, outstanding.
You'll see the inscription
Oh,
inside.
that's great. Thank
so
you.
I figured you would
Thank
love
you.
Alan Lew,
Yeah, he was a
Rabbi Lew.
genius. He was a genius.
He was. You know, there's flashcards here. I put my mouse pad up. You know, there's all these things. Just if you have this intention, I think you could end up where you are, which is really impressive.
Where am I?
A person
In your backyard?
A person who can stand up and read right from the Torah.
Oh, I can't do that.
And a person.
No,
really?
you can do that. I can't do that.
What do you do?
But you can read.
I would, if I practiced, I could do it, but I'd have to practice a long time.
Same.
Yeah.
Tell us anything about your adult education. Tell us how you, anything.
You know, I almost 10 after. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I've been around a long time, so you got to be careful asking me open-ended questions like that. I was bar mitzvah Orthodox.
Really?
And yes, we moved around a lot, and my dad was an optometrist, and he worked for Stan Pearl, who I think was a member of this congregation many years ago.
It's his yard site this weekend.
Yeah, and he was in the business side of the practice for a very long time, most of my childhood, and so every 2 years, I don't know if that was by intention or not, but that's what happened. We moved to another territory where he needed to get some stores up, functioning profitably. And when he did that, and he always did, then we would go somewhere else. When I was 13, we were in Wichita, Kansas. And I think, we never had a conversation about it, but I think that my dad's natural inclination would have been toward the conservative movement.
Okay.
And so whenever we went somewhere, we would join the shul that made him feel good. And if there was only I hate to say how many years ago that was, so if there was only a Reform and an Orthodox synagogue in a fairly small town then in Kansas, well then we joined the Orthodox. So I had the experience of being bar mitzvah Orthodox. It was not a good experience. I think I am not by accident a question asker. It comes to me naturally. And at that time, in the 60s, early 60s, I think my math is right, Orthodox rabbis and cantors in small towns didn't want to be asked, what does this mean? They didn't want to be asked, why am I saying this? And they'd get very angry. Very angry. And you just learn it. Don't worry about what it means. So, of course, I did. And that turned me off for a while. And when I got out of the Army in 1970, my folks had moved here, and they lived not very far from here. And so they joined the closest geographic synagogue, which was an Orthodox synagogue. And I didn't know where I was going to land yet, so I went to a couple of high holidays with them and got yelled at, not individually, from the bima by the rabbi, all bad Jews and give money. And I remember thinking, that's why I kind of drifted away. And so I drifted away again. And I found Temple Emmanuel in the early 80s when I was getting married. It was an interfaith marriage, and they were one thing about temple that is the same now as it was then is just the warm embrace.
Yes.
From Rabbi Zimmerman on down. When I had a bunch of life changes, real serious ones, my marriage was ending after a long period of time, and I felt like my life, I was doing okay professionally, but my life was just a mess. And the question that I asked myself was, what are you going to do differently? You have to do something differently. Because this isn't working. The immediate answer came, well, you have really neglected your spiritual side, not religious. And so I made an appointment with David Stern, who I did not understand what this meant at the time, but he gave me an hour. Nancy Caston does not get an hour with David Stern, as you well know. So from that point, my mind and my heart opened, and that's a journey that's still in progress, that is now 15 years old, 15 years along. And so I am much more observant and much more intentional about my Judaism than I've ever been, and I'm exactly in the right congregation. I'm not trying to be Orthodox, I'm not trying to be conservative, and I go to some conservative services. What we do, that's what suits me. And Rabbi Lou's teaching so very much in concert with that. So the most important part of my education, my Jewish education, really is centered around the study of Musar. Since Alan Marinas came 11 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that, that's been transformative in my life. And when I started that journey 15 years ago, I went from a twice-a-year Jew to a twice-a-week Jew in the span of about a year. And so, it's funny, I was thinking coming over here about how one thing that's happened in the last 4 months is we lose track of what day of the week it is pretty easily.
Right.
But I never don't know that it's Friday. Because at 6:15 Friday night, I got to be right there.
That's right.
And that's been an anchor.
It's the same with us. We feel the very same way. Let me see. I just want to see if they're saying anything. I think a lot of Shabbat Shaloms, and if they ask some questions, they're up in the top where I can't see them. But I know one that people want to know, particularly Jewish people, because at 6:15, like you're saying, we begin that shutdown. What about the intersection of career and Judaism? And how do you deal with that? Do you ever have any challenges where you need to be two places at once, one spiritual and one work-related?
I couldn't do the job I do if I were Orthodox. I'm aware of that. The most obvious clash along the lines of what you're talking about has happened twice in the last 5 years when the Cowboys have had a game on a high holiday. And it's never a choice for me. I've never worked on the high holidays, not just doing the Cowboys, my entire life. I didn't go to school. I don't work. And so that wasn't a choice. But when you have a public job and people only are aware of you real actively, like 20 times a year, then they notice when you're not there doing that job. And so that's happened twice. Now, there have been a lot of times where I've had to go to services out of town. But there's never a question about what's preeminent. Now, this year will be interesting because Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre is on a Sunday night.
Right.
Now, I don't know what the football travel schedule is going to be, but the Cowboys that Sunday are in Seattle. So if it was a normal year, I would probably go do the game and If I was done in time, I would stream our late service, which I did in Charlotte a couple of years ago, and stay for Yom Kippur and fly home. Now, in this case, I don't know if we'll be traveling or not.
Right.
And I have been invited to read the book of Jonah again, which is the greatest honor I've ever had.
Will you tell our
Yes,
audience what
yeah.
you're talking about if they don't know?
Well, it's actually a funny story. To me, it's a funny story. Rabbi Klein of Shalom, which everyone knows, so beloved in our community, and was so intricately identified with reading the story of Jonah on Yom Kippur afternoon. And when he passed away in March of, I want to say 2008, roughly, I remember he passed away in March. I remember sitting at then Valley Ranch working on a May afternoon, completely apropos of nothing. And the thought jumped into my head, I wonder what poor SOB they're going to get to follow Jerry Klein. You can't do that. About 2 hours later, Rabbi Stern called me, and I found out what poor SOB they were trying to get to replace Rabbi Klein. So, because I knew him, everybody who knew Jerry Klein loved him. Just following him is an honor beyond my vocabulary to describe. Then, getting the opportunity to share that with our community, that's an amazing honor. Either one of them, Dayenu, right? And I have never been given a contract that guarantees me, as far as I'm concerned, they will decide the next year if they want me to do it again.
I'm sure it's a long-term contract.
People say that, and as you both probably know, as soon as you start thinking that way, that's when you get fired. So this year, I hope our community can appreciate how hard our clergy and staff have worked and are working to come up with the most workable, best plan for the high holidays in this insanity in which we live.
Sure.
Unbelievable what they're doing. And so those plans are now coming together, so I have been invited to read Jonah. So now that I've accepted that, I don't know if we'll be traveling. I may be doing road games. First, I'm presuming that the schedule will be played as scheduled. And then, all the baseball teams are doing road games at home. They're sitting in a booth at their home stadium doing the road games.
Right.
And we might be doing that, although no one's told me that yet, but reason tells me to prepare for it. But if we're not, if I am allowed to fly on the plane, which I've always done, and which, who knows, the regulations are still being determined, but I'll figure out what to do with Kol Nidre, and I'll be back, and then I'll be at home on Yom Kippur afternoon. And my biggest decision right now is whether to put on a tie. I mean, I'm going to be at home. I won't wear a T-shirt.
Right.
But, how far do we want to go? What kind of an illusion are we trying to create? It's really the greatest honor I've ever been given, and I very much look forward to it every year.
Well, can I tell you that Harold Colney wishes
Colney.
you Shabbat Shalom, and Andrea, Dassy Cohen. So many people are jumping on here to wish you Shabbat Shalom.
I will look for all of you at 6:15 in the Zoom room.
Me too. So I have one last question for you,
Sure.
and then we'll dive into other stuff.
Please.
My question is, a lot of people during this time have found that they've had a little bit more time for the Zoom learning sessions, or canter in the kitchen, or they've learned a little something here and there, and maybe they're having a new interest or an enhanced interest in Shabbat, or studying, or learning learning anything about Judaism, where would you start if you were an adult and you wanted to start with some adult Jewish learning?
What a great question. Well, honestly, if you're starting with a clean slate, the first thing I would do would be what I did: go to services. The warmth of our clergy. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, or any of you, but the warmth of our clergy is so embracing, and it then spreads to the community, and so the community is so embracing that you kind of want to step in a little deeper. You want to, if you're taking a step in and dipping a toe, well, then you want to go with shin high because it just feels good. And then I would probably take advantage of some of the weekday clergy sessions that they are offering, besides Cantor in the Kitsch,
which is super fun.
which is fantastic, but
and yoga.
and absolutely yoga. But our clergy are doing sessions throughout the week that would kind of give people a little sense of what to study. I don't miss ever on a Saturday morning if I'm now around a computer or if I'm in town. Cover Torah at 9:00 on Saturday morning. I think the study of Torah is fascinating, and then once you fall in love with that, then Talmud classes Wednesday morning at 7:30. That'll blow your mind. That's great, and Rabbi Josh Taub is doing a great job filling in the summer right now, while Rabbi Stern is on his break, and it's kind of like being a 12-year-old again, where you get to say, ooh, but wait, what if he said that? And you think of the most outrageous thing, and that's what the rabbis are arguing about. And it gives you a real sense of how the things that are in here, how they came to be, and how they come to life in our lives. So those are places to start, and then there's 100 jumping off places for me.
I just want to piggyback on one thing you said. One of the first things I did was I bought the Torah, and it's like got so many stickies. I just wanted to read it for myself, the way you would read a novel.
Yeah.
And then I really started dipping my shin.
Once you do that, then you have to go to Hever Torah classes, because there's not a word in the Torah that's there by accident.
Right.
And so you have to pay attention to what seem like innocuous adjectives that make you say, wait, why did they say that instead of this? And there's another rabbit hole to go down.
Or a repetition.
Or one of my favorites is after Jacob wrestles with the Ish and is now named Israel, throughout the rest of the Torah there are places where he's Jacob and places where he's Israel. Why? Wait, Rabbi, why here? Why is that Yisrael? And why 3 chapters before was he Yaakov? What's the purpose? What are they trying to tell us? And if you're inclined in those directions, then Cover Torah is a great place to start.
Well, there's your transition.
That's a segue.
There's your segue right into
what
the
I do.
Torah portion of the week.
That's what I do.
I was like, boy, that one was an easy one. Let me get out of your way. Take it away, Barry Rothschild.
Okay, since you mentioned it, I don't know, this week's Torah portion, we begin with the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Torah. And this is the first parsha, or portion of Deuteronomy, which is called Devarim. And it's interesting, we have Brad here. Brad, I've been listening to you for over 40 years.
Thank you.
And this week we learned about the 40 years in the desert. And why in the heck did it take 40 years for these Israelites to get to where they are now, just on the banks of the Jordan River, waiting to go into the Promised Land? And Moses decides to give let's say, like a graduation speech, or some people say it's a farewell speech. But what happens is he explains in historical form what has taken place, Why? Because these guys, other than Caleb and Joshua and Moses, no one was around, because 40 years prior, after they received the Torah, Moses thought it was a great idea. And this is great, because this is a leadership thing that takes place. Moses says, I'm going to give you the history of what's taken place in those 40 years, and to tell you about the Exodus of Egypt and why you were there in Egypt in the first place, and how did you leave with receiving the Torah. But he comes up with this idea, and he says he sends 12 spies over to check on what's going on in the Promised Land. Come back, tell us what happens, and he's got 10 of those 12 come back and say, it's beautiful, just as you said it was going to be, but there's monsters. The army, the men over there are just huge. They're going to squash us like ants. So they go and sulk in their tents. They're scared. God gets angry, and that God says, I don't want people like that lose their trust, their faith in me, to cross into the Promised Land. I'm going to wait 40 years to get a whole generation away from them. So Moses now tells them about all this and other stories. And in this story about the 12 spies, he says it was good in his eyes, meaning he takes it upon himself to find fault with himself. What a great leadership skill. He says it was good in my eyes at the time, but as it turned out, it may have been a big disaster, because it led to 40 years in the desert, taking 40 years to what seemingly would have taken 11 days. We didn't have Uber back then. It would have taken 11 days to make this journey if they had just gone straight to it, but they didn't. So this is a leadership time. This is a time that everyone needs to remember. Sometimes say, if you make a mistake, it was good in my eyes, but I made a mistake. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Yashka.
Okay, the challah, we always, every week, we as we begin to draw to a close, we check how it's doing. It's rising out here in the huge heat.
Beautiful.
It's getting really, here we go. All right, and then, we have a new tradition here, and that is that everyone that comes on the Shabbos show gets prizes.
Who doesn't love prizes?
My son Jeremy said, this is just like the basket they give at the Tonight Show. It's the same thing. So the Alan Lou book.
Yes,
now you have two. One can go on the road with
and
you.
This is your other gift.
Oh,
I have
thank
to
you.
get the other things.
Thank
so y'all talk there. You're going to
This
show
is,
him that.
and honestly, I am one of the things I moved about a year ago, just before the football season.
Really?
And so one of the things I have tried to take advantage of the downtime is to finally unpack the boxes that I had stuck in corners. And so there are still books that I'm finding, and I'm not sure that I found my copy of that. Now this is really interesting
now
to
this
me.
is practically bribery. We were doing anything to get you here, and this is
Well,
yours.
What is it?
No.
This is yours.
Oh, no,
Yes,
that can't be.
it is.
I don't even know what this is. What
Well,
is it?
you do, and the scouting report is that you don't want any part of it, which to me means you really need Dr. Colney. I believe your services are needed. This is homemade chopped liver.
True, just for you. And I have a little one for me.
Oh,
that's for you.
Oh, that's really too much. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Now, did you see that? What's in that bag? You have to look at that too.
Okay.
This is interesting.
So let me tell you what this is.
Oh.
This is some Buffalo Trace
Whoa,
Distillery.
hello.
And it's a
Can we
wheat,
show them?
Yes, please.
It's a wheat bourbon. So kosher wines are commonplace, but kosher whiskey isn't. So this whiskey was overseen every step of the way by the Chicago Rabbinic Assembly. And so they checked out
My hometown?
So we don't necessarily,
Wow.
as Reformed Jews, we don't really go into this all together. But on the other hand, how nice is it to occasionally have something that's kosher?
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
And that
Thank
came
you.
to you from my son Jeremy,
Thank you, Jeremy.
who is a bourbon aficionado. I
Thank
don't
you.
know what you
Oh
would
my
say,
gosh,
but he has
thank
a
you.
little
That's
wisdom there.
lovely. That's
So-
fantastic. Thank you.
Well, what a wonderful treat for us.
Oh, for me too.
Thank you.
What a
It's
pleasure.
absolutely wonderful.
What a pleasure.
Honey?
Thank you.
Shabbat
Thank
shalom.
you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Wow.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
See you at
So
6:15.
happy to see you. Jeremy says same recipe as Pappy Van Winkle.
Oh.
Good to know.
Good to know.
Bye, everyone. See you next week.
Oh, what fun.